the silence didn't arrive gently. It slammed into the ballroom. A second earlier, the room had been alive with polished laughter and the soft clink of crystal glasses. Chandeliers shimmered against marble walls. Perfume and expensive cologne hung heavy in the air. Then the music faltered. Forks paused midair. 500 executives turned toward the stage as if pulled by the same invisible thread. Eliza Whitmore stood beneath the lights, flawless in silver silk, except her hands were gripping the podium hard enough to turn her knuckles pale. "I built an empire," she said, her voice steady at first, then cracking in a way no one had ever heard. "But I go home to silence. I'm alone." The confession didn't just echo. It fractured the room. Phones lifted instantly. Cameras zoomed in. Livestream comments flooded across screens. Near the service doors at the back, Caleb Hart felt every eye shift without even looking. He stood in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, grease permanently embedded in his knuckles despite scrubbing. His 8-year-old daughter, Emma, squeezed his hand, sensing something enormous but not understanding why. Then Eliza looked straight at him. Not past him, not through him. At him. "Caleb Hart," she said clearly, her voice carrying to the very back wall. "Would you consider going on one date with me?" The air seemed to thin. 500 elites turned toward the maintenance supervisor they had walked past 100 times without learning his name. Caleb's heart pounded, not because of the invitation, but because he knew whatever he said next wouldn't just change his life. It would shape his daughter's future. Subscribe to Just Dad Things for more powerful single dad stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Ridgehaven, Colorado woke up slow. The mountains held the morning light like they were deciding whether to release it. Frost clung to pickup trucks. Coffee shops opened their doors with the same familiar bell chime. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just a town that worked hard and went to bed early. Caleb Hart's day started before the sun. The alarm went off at 5:30, but most mornings he was already awake. He would lie there for a second, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. 3 years ago, that quiet used to mean Claire was still asleep beside him. Now, it meant responsibility. He slipped out of bed without turning on the lights. By 6, the kitchen smelled like pancake batter and strong coffee. Not the boxed kind either. Emma once said homemade tasted more real, so he learned. The first few attempts were disasters. Burned edges, raw centers. Now they came out golden. "Dad?" Emma's sleepy voice would call from the hallway. He'd turn just in time to see her shuffle in wearing mismatched socks and a t-shirt 2 sizes too big. She always leaned against him for a second before sitting down, like she needed to recharge. 8 years old and already more observant than most adults. After breakfast came the hair. The first time he tried braiding it, he'd nearly cried from frustration. Claire used to do it so effortlessly. He watched tutorials late at night after Emma fell asleep, practicing on a piece of rope from the garage. Now his fingers moved slowly but confidently, parting, crossing, tightening. "Not too tight," Emma would remind him. "Never too tight," he'd answer. By 7:15, he dropped her at Ridgehaven Elementary. He always waited until she walked through the doors before pulling away. Then he drove to Whitmore Systems. The corporate campus rose from the edge of town like something imported from somewhere bigger. Glass buildings reflecting mountain peaks. Clean lines. Perfect landscaping. Caleb parked in the far employee lot, same space every day. Maintenance supervisor. It sounded steady. Respectable. It paid less than construction. A lot less. But construction meant long hours, unpredictable jobs, sometimes weeks out of town. After Claire's diagnosis, he had promised himself Emma would never feel alone in a hospital waiting room again. So he traded higher pay for predictability. He managed a small crew, fixed broken HVAC systems, replaced ceiling panels, checked fire alarms, walked corridors others barely noticed. He kept the invisible systems running so executives could stand on polished stages without worrying about flickering lights. Some days he skipped lunch to finish paperwork. Other days he sat in his truck after clocking out, finishing maintenance reports so he could leave early on Fridays to attend Emma's school assemblies. Medical bills from Claire's treatment still arrived in white envelopes that felt heavier than paper should. He had set up payment plans, negotiated interest, cut everything unnecessary. No cable, no vacations. His truck had over 200,000 miles on it, and he prayed it would make it through one more winter. 2 months ago, the school counselor pulled him aside. Emma tested exceptionally high in applied science, she said. There's a private STEM enrichment program starting next fall. The brochure was glossy. The tuition number wasn't. Caleb smiled politely, took the pamphlet, thanked her. That night, he sat at the kitchen table long after Emma went to bed, running numbers on a yellow legal pad. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, minimum payments. The math did not bend. He folded the brochure carefully and slid it into a drawer instead of throwing it away. Just in case. The stakes were simple and brutal. If he lost his job, they lost their health insurance. Emma's asthma inhalers weren't optional. If he worked overtime constantly, Emma would eat dinner alone too many nights. If gossip followed him, if something damaged his reputation, Ridgehaven was small enough that whispers reached playgrounds quickly. Emma never asked for much, but she noticed everything. She noticed when he said he wasn't hungry after serving her a bigger portion. She noticed when he checked the mailbox and his shoulders tightened slightly. She noticed when he stared at Claire's photo a second longer than usual before turning out the lights. One evening, as they washed dishes together, Emma said quietly, "Dad, you don't have to pretend you're not tired." He had to turn away so she wouldn't see his face. Everything he did, every scraped knuckle, every overtime hour, every swallowed frustration, traced back to one promise made in a hostel room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. Claire's hand had been thin in his. "Keep her safe," she had whispered. "I will," he told her. Not just physically safe, emotionally safe, financially stable, unashamed. That promise became the center of his life. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't ambitious for himself anymore. His ambition had narrowed into one fierce lane. Emma would not feel the instability he felt growing up. She would not see doors close because her father made reckless choices. So when people at work joked about shooting your shot or climbing social ladders, Caleb smiled politely and returned to tightening bolts and checking pressure gauges. He didn't need more. He needed enough. And enough was fragile. Everything in his life balanced on steady employment, steady reputation, steady routine. Because if that balance tipped, even slightly, it wouldn't just bruise his pride, it would shake the only world his daughter knew. Caleb had worked at Whitmore Systems for almost 3 years before he ever exchanged more than 2 sentences with Eliza Whitmore. He'd seen her, of course. Everyone had. You couldn't miss her when she walked through the campus. Not because she was loud, she wasn't, but because the air shifted around her. Conversation straightened. Postures adjusted. Even the security team seemed to stand taller. She wasn't much older than 35, but she carried authority like someone twice that age. Always tailored suits. Always precise steps. Dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably wasn't. No wasted motion, no unnecessary smiles. Employees called her the Glacier, not to her face, never that. Behind closed doors, in maintenance closets and break rooms, they said it half-jokingly. She was brilliant, demanding, focused. But she didn't linger, didn't chat, didn't attend birthday cakes in the cafeteria. She built Whitmore Systems from a startup into the backbone of Ridgehaven's economy. Fiber infrastructure, data storage, clean energy grids. The campus employed nearly a third of the town, and she ran it like a precision instrument. Caleb respected that. He also understood something most executives didn't. Buildings told the truth about the people running them. Whitmore's campus gleamed. Glass corridors, silent HVAC, backup generators that hummed like disciplined soldiers. It wasn't just architecture. It was control. The first real conversation between Caleb and Eliza happened on a Tuesday morning during a full campus inspection. Caleb had been reviewing a service corridor behind one of the main server halls when he heard heels approach on concrete. He turned and saw her. Eliza Whitmore. No entourage this time. Just a tablet in her hand and that steady, unreadable expression. She stopped beside a maintenance panel that had been temporarily secured with industrial tape. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why is this not permanently sealed?" she asked. Her tone wasn't angry. It was exact. Caleb wiped his hands on a cloth before answering. "Replacement parts been on back order for 2 weeks. Temporary seal meets safety code. Crews scheduled to install the new latch as soon as it arrives." She looked at him directly. Not over him, not around him. "Temporary solutions have a way of becoming permanent," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he replied evenly. "Not this one." There was a pause. She scanned the area again. How many similar back orders? 4 total across campus. Budget reduction last quarter slowed supplier approvals. He didn't add blame. Didn't shift responsibility. He stated facts. For a brief second, something flickered in her expression. Calculation, maybe irritation at the system rather than him. She tapped something into her tablet. "Send me the list," she said, directly. "Yes, ma'am." She walked away without another word. Caleb exhaled slowly. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't kindness either. It was an audit of reality. That was the thing about Eliza Whitmore. She didn't yell. She didn't belittle. She dissected. Later that week, Caleb saw her again, but this time not in a corridor. It was just after school dismissal. Emma sat in the main lobby at one of the long wooden benches, backpack open, wires and plastic tubing spilling out like a miniature laboratory. Caleb was finishing a repair upstairs and running 5 minutes behind. Emma, however, did not mind waiting. She had discovered an audience, 2 receptionists and a security guard who were now being lectured enthusiastically. "So if sunlight hits the black panel," she explained, holding up a handmade cardboard contraption, "it heats the water and then the charcoal filters out the bad stuff. That means you could clean water without electricity." The guard blinked. "You built that?" "It's a prototype," Emma corrected proudly. That was when Eliza stepped into the lobby. Her heels echoed across the polished floor. The receptionist straightened immediately. Emma didn't notice. "And if you angle it like this," Emma continued, tilting the panel toward the windows, "it gets more direct exposure during winter months." Eliza slowed. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't interrupting. She was listening. Emma finally looked up and saw the unfamiliar woman standing there. "Oh," Emma said, slightly startled. "Sorry. I was just explaining." "Eliza Whitmore," one receptionist said quickly. Emma's eyes widened. "You're the one who built the big solar array on the east building," she blurted. A flicker, almost amusement, crossed Eliza's face. "Yes," she said simply. Emma immediately launched into a question about photovoltaic efficiency in cold climates. Most adults would have nodded politely and excused themselves. Eliza did not. She answered, briefly, precisely. Emma absorbed every word like oxygen. Caleb arrived just in time to see the tail end of the exchange. He felt a small jolt of unease, seeing his daughter animated in front of the most powerful person in town. "Sorry," he said quickly, stepping forward. "She gets excited." "She should," Eliza replied. Her gaze shifted from Emma to Caleb. For a moment, the corporate armor seemed thinner. "You're raising a curious mind," she said. Then the wall returned. "Good evening." And she walked out through the glass doors into the waiting black car that always appeared exactly on time. Emma watched her go, eyes wide. "She's not scary," Emma whispered. Caleb wasn't sure he agreed, but he understood something new. Eliza Whitmore wasn't cruel. She was insulated. Her house on the hill overlooked the entire valley, modern glass, steel, and perfect symmetry. People in Ridgehaven said the lights stayed on late into the night. What they didn't see was that when she went home, there was no one waiting inside. No backpack on the floor, no half-finished science projects on the kitchen table. Just silence. And for the first time, standing in that lobby watching her walk away, Caleb sensed that the glacier wasn't made of arrogance. It was made of distance, and distance, he knew, could be colder than cruelty. The storm rolled into Ridgehaven without warning. One minute the sky was pale and clear, the next it was swallowed by thick, fast-moving clouds that turned the mountains into shadows. By early afternoon, wind was slicing down the valley hard enough to rattle window panes across town. Inside Whitmore Systems, the timing couldn't have been worse. Eliza Whitmore was hosting a group of out-of-state investors, suits from Chicago, analysts from Boston, people who cared about numbers, stability, and performance under pressure. The presentation was being held in the main atrium, a glass-walled architectural showpiece that symbolized transparency and innovation. Outside, snow began to fall sideways. In the maintenance control room below the atrium, Caleb Hart watched the weather alert flash across a small monitor. "Here we go," one of his technicians muttered. The campus power grid was strong, upgraded when Whitmore expanded, but parts of the older infrastructure still relied on synchronization between the main line and backup generators. If the timing drifted even slightly during a surge, the systems could hiccup. And hiccups in front of investors were expensive. At exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, the lights flickered. Just once. Upstairs, in the atrium, the investors shifted slightly but remained composed. Eliza continued speaking without missing a word. Downstairs, Caleb was already moving. "Check the load transfer," he ordered calmly. "Unit 3's lagging." One technician frowned at the monitor. "It's not syncing." Caleb stepped forward. He knew this building, knew its rhythms, knew which generator had been temperamental during cold snaps. The wind howled louder. Another flicker. "Main grid's fluctuating," someone said. "Reroute partial load to the east wing," Caleb replied. "Manual override." "That's not standard protocol." "It is today." He grabbed his radio. "Keep the atrium stable." "That's priority." Upstairs, Eliza's presentation continued smoothly. Graphs projected across the screen. Projected revenue curves. Clean energy initiatives. Investors nodding. None of them knew that one faulty synchronization could darken the entire room. Caleb crouched beside the main panel, flipping protective covers and manually recalibrating the transfer sequence. His hands moved with practiced precision. He wasn't frantic, he wasn't loud. He was steady. Another technician whispered, "If this fails, they'll blame us." Caleb didn't look up. "No, they won't." He meant it. The system shuddered once more, then stabilized. The hum of the generators deepened into a smooth, even rhythm. Upstairs, the lights held. Crisis averted. But Caleb didn't relax yet. His phone vibrated in his pocket. "Emma." He stepped aside, answering immediately. "Hey, Em." "Dad?" Her voice was small. "The buses stopped. They said roads are icing and we have to wait inside." He closed his eyes briefly, picturing her standing in the school lobby with melting snow on her boots. "I'm still at work," he said gently, "but you're safe, okay? I know." "I just didn't want you to worry." That nearly broke him. "I always worry," he replied softly. "But I trust you. I brought my science book," she added quickly, "so I'm not bored. That's my girl." He glanced back at the control panels. Everything was holding steady. "I might be a little late picking you up," he said. "But I will be there." "I know you will," she answered without hesitation. He hung up and returned to the crew. "Everything good?" one asked. "Everything's good," Caleb replied. He checked each system personally. verified loads, confirmed pressure readings, double-checked the override logs so no junior tech would be blamed for unconventional routing. When the storm intensified, he positioned extra crew in vulnerable zones but refused to let anyone panic. Upstairs, the presentation concluded with applause. Investors shook hands. Contracts were discussed. Stability had been demonstrated, even if no one knew how close they'd come to embarrassment. Later that evening, when the worst of the storm had passed and Emma was finally safe in the passenger seat of his truck with the heater blasting, Caleb returned briefly to campus to finalize system checks. The atrium was nearly empty now. Eliza stood near the glass windows, watching snow drift across the courtyard. She turned when she heard his boots approach. "The presentation went smoothly," she said. "Yes, ma'am." The grid did not. He hesitated. "We managed it." She studied him carefully. "I reviewed the system logs," she said. "You rerouted manually." "Yes, that is not standard procedure." "No," he agreed. "But it was the safest option." A long pause followed. "Why did you take responsibility for the override?" she asked quietly. "You could have attributed it to equipment failure." Caleb shrugged slightly. "Because it was my call." She absorbed that. Most people protected themselves first, redirected blame, preserved reputation. He had done the opposite. "You were also on the phone during the surge," she added. "My daughter," he said simply. "Is she safe?" "Yes." Another silence, softer this time. The snow reflected faint light across the glass walls, illuminating them in a pale glow. "Caleb," she said. It was the first time she had used his name without rank or title. Not Mr. Hart, not supervisor, just Caleb. "Thank you." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it carried weight. He nodded. "Just doing my job." As he walked away, Eliza remained by the window. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about profit margins or investor confidence. She was thinking about the man downstairs who kept her empire running and still made time to calm his daughter during a storm. She had built Whitmore systems on discipline. But discipline wasn't what she saw today. She saw steadiness. And for the first time, the glacier felt something shift beneath the surface. It didn't start with a scandal. It started with something small, something human. Something that should have been forgotten the moment it happened. A laugh in a hallway. A warm exchange after a long day. Emma standing between them for a second, smiling like she belonged in that space. Someone captured it from a distance, a phone camera. A few blurry frames. Just enough to tell a story, not enough to tell the truth. By morning, it was everywhere. A local blog posted the photo with a headline that made Caleb's stomach drop before he even finished reading it. Billionaire CEO gets cozy with campus. Maintenance is Ridgehaven's ice queen melting. Comments flooded in. Some were playful. Some were cruel. Too many were the kind of cruel that didn't even realize it was cruel. People making jokes about his work boots, about his hands, about the fact that he didn't belong in her world. Then the bigger outlets picked it up, not because Ridgehaven was famous, but because the contrast was irresistible to the internet. Billionaire, maintenance man, single dad, little girl. It became a story people could project onto. Caleb didn't even know about it at first. He found out the way most working people find out their lives have become entertainment. A coworker walked past him in the service corridor and said, "Man, you're trending." Caleb blinked. "What?" The coworker held up his phone, and there it was. Caleb in the hallway, head slightly tilted as if he was listening. Eliza Whitmore facing him, her expression softer than anyone had ever seen. Emma beside them, grinning, holding her backpack straps. It looked like a scene from a movie. In reality, it had been a 10-second conversation about a broken lobby heater and Emma's upcoming science fair. But truth didn't matter once the story took off. By lunchtime, the whispers started inside the building, not the obvious ones either. not people directly confronting him. The quiet kind. The sideways looks. The sudden drop in conversation when he entered the break room. The way certain executives suddenly acted like they had never seen him before. That afternoon, Caleb got an email. Mandatory meeting with human resources. Professionalism review. His chest tightened so hard he had to sit down for a second. He reread it twice, hoping he misunderstood. Professionalism review. That phrase was a weapon. It sounded neutral. It sounded procedural. But it could end careers. Caleb walked to HR with the steady pace of a man who refused to look guilty even when he hadn't done anything wrong. 2 HR representatives sat behind a conference table, smiling faces. Not kind, not cruel. Just corporate. "We want to address a concern," one said. Caleb nodded once. "Okay. There's been public attention," the other added carefully, as if even saying the word might dirty their mouths. Caleb said nothing. They slid a printed copy of the photo across the table. "We need to ensure professional boundaries are maintained," the first one said, "especially when it involves senior leadership." Caleb stared at the paper. "Are you accusing me of something?" he asked quietly. "No," the second representative said quickly. "Not accusing, just clarifying expectations." Then came the line that made his blood run cold. "It has been suggested," the first one continued, "that the presence of your child may have been used to create a more favorable impression." Caleb didn't move, but something inside him snapped into a different gear. "You think I used my daughter," he said slowly, "to impress anyone?" The HR representative lifted her hands. "We're not saying that's what happened. We're just obligated to review." "My daughter is 8 years old," Caleb cut in, his voice still controlled but sharper now. "She waits in the lobby because I don't have money for after-school care every day. She smiles at people because she's a kid. That's not a strategy." Silence. The second rep cleared his throat. "Of course. We just want to avoid distractions." Caleb leaned forward slightly. "My daughter is not a distraction." He stood. "Are we done?" They looked uncomfortable now, not because they felt sorry, because he wasn't playing the role they expected. "Caleb," the first rep said, softer, "we're recommending you keep interactions with the CEO strictly professional. For your own protection." He nodded once. "Understood." He walked out with his jaw locked so tightly it hurt. But he kept walking. Because the hardest part wasn't the building. The hardest part was going to be Emma. He picked her up that evening from school. She climbed into the truck quieter than usual. Caleb noticed immediately. "How was your day?" he asked, keeping his tone normal. Emma stared out the window, fingers twisting the zipper on her backpack. "It was fine," she said. That was never her answer. Caleb's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Talk to me," she swallowed. "Some kid said, 'You're famous now.'" His throat went dry. "What else did they say?" Emma hesitated, then forced the words out like they tasted bad. "They said you're trying to marry the ice lady for money." She paused. "And they said I'm your trick." Caleb felt heat surge behind his eyes. He pulled the truck into a quiet side street and parked, engine still running. Emma's voice cracked. "I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say." Caleb turned to her slowly, forcing his face to stay calm even though his chest felt like it was collapsing. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. Emma blinked hard. "But why would they say that?" "Because adults were messy. Because people love stories more than humans. Because class made people cruel." But he couldn't say all that, so he reached across and took her hand. "People talk when they don't understand," he said softly, "and when they're bored." Emma looked down. "Are you in trouble?" That question was the stake. That was the knife. Caleb swallowed. "No," he lied gently. "You and me, we're okay." Emma nodded, but she didn't look convinced. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Caleb sat at the kitchen table staring at his resignation letter draft. It was half written. Just a few lines, enough to end it. Not because he was guilty, because he was protective. He could take jokes. He could take whispers. He could take a damaged reputation, but Emma couldn't. She deserved to walk into school without carrying his problems on her small shoulders. By the next morning, the board had already moved. Eliza Whitmore was pulled into a closed-door meeting with her chairperson and investor representatives. Caleb didn't hear the details, but he felt the energy shift across the campus. Meetings whispered behind glass. Security tightened. Emails flew. Then, around noon, his phone buzzed with a message he didn't expect. Eliza's assistant, Caleb. CEO Whitmore requests a brief private meeting. Service stairwell corridor. 10 minutes. Caleb stared at the screen, heart pounding. He should have said no. But he couldn't. He walked to the service corridor where the walls were unfinished and the air smelled faintly of metal and dust. A place the executives never walked through. Eliza was already there, alone. No entourage, no assistant, no board members, just her. Her face was composed, but her eyes looked tired in a way he'd never noticed before. "Caleb," she said. He didn't soften, not today. "I can handle rumors," he said immediately, voice low, controlled, "but my daughter can't." Eliza's expression tightened. "They went after her," he continued. "She heard it at school. She asked me if I was in trouble." Eliza's breath caught slightly, like the words hit somewhere deeper than the surface. "I didn't ask for this," Caleb said. "I didn't chase you down a hallway. I didn't leak anything. I didn't do a single thing except my job." "I know," she said quietly. Caleb's eyes stayed on her. "Then fix it." The corridor was silent except for the distant hum of the building. Eliza looked away for a moment as if she was watching an invisible battle play out in her mind. "They want me to release a statement," she admitted, "clarifying boundaries." "Distancing." Caleb's jaw clenched. "And what does that do to me?" he asked. Eliza didn't answer fast enough. That was the answer. Caleb took a slow breath, forcing his voice to stay steady. "If you erase me to protect yourself, you don't just erase me. You erase her." He gestured slightly, not dramatic, but firm. "And I will not let my kid be collateral damage for anyone's reputation. Not even yours." Eliza's eyes lifted back to his, and for the first time, the glacier looked genuinely shaken, not because she was scared of losing money, because she was realizing what silence cost, because she was realizing that if she did nothing, the strongest man in her building would quietly walk away and take the only warmth she'd felt in years with him. And Eliza Whitmore finally understood something she'd never allowed herself to think before. This wasn't about optics. This was about people. Caleb didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the only light in the house coming from the small lamp above the stove. The resignation letter lay in front of him, no longer half-written. Now it was complete, short, professional, respectful. He thanked Whitmore Systems for the opportunity. He cited personal reasons. He offered 2 weeks' notice, though he knew they might walk him out sooner. He read it 3 times. Every word felt heavier than it should. This wasn't about pride anymore. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about Emma walking into school without whispers trailing behind her. At 6 in the morning, he printed it. Emma shuffled into the kitchen in her oversized sweatshirt, rubbing her eyes. "You're up early," she said. "So are you." She climbed onto the stool, quieter than usual. No questions about pancakes. No talk about science experiments. Caleb watched her carefully. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Emma nodded too quickly. He poured syrup over her plate and tried to keep his voice steady. "I might make a change at work," he said carefully. Emma's fork paused midair. "Are we moving?" she asked. The question wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was small and terrified. Caleb felt something inside his chest splinter. "No," he said immediately. "We're not moving." But he didn't know that for certain. If he resigned, the mortgage would get tighter. Health insurance would disappear. Construction jobs were seasonal. Ridgehaven was small. Emma studied his face the way she always did when she suspected he wasn't telling the whole truth. "I like my school," she said softly. "I know, and I like my room." "I know." She looked down at her plate. "Did I mess something up?" The words were barely audible. Caleb reached across the table and lifted her chin gently. "You didn't mess up anything," he said firmly. "You hear me?" "Not one thing." Emma nodded, but her eyes were shining. That was the moment Caleb knew the decision had already been made. Not because HR pressured him, not because the board whispered, because Emma was scared. He drove to campus that morning with the envelope on the passenger seat. The building looked the same as always, glass shining, employees streaming in with coffee cups and key cards. He parked in his usual spot. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. He had survived layoffs before. He had rebuilt after Claire's hospital bills swallowed their savings. He could survive this too. But this felt different. This felt like surrender. He walked inside, boots echoing against the polished floor. He didn't look toward the executive wing. He didn't need closure. He went straight to HR. "I'm submitting my resignation," he said simply. The representative blinked, surprised. "Effective when?" "2 weeks, unless you prefer sooner." They exchanged a glance. "We'll process this," the representative said carefully. Caleb nodded once. That was it. No argument. No dramatic confrontation. Just a good man stepping away because he believed that was the honorable thing to do. That evening, snow drifted lightly across Ridgehaven again. Emma sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, her half-finished solar purifier spread out in pieces. Caleb knocked gently on the doorframe. "Bedtime, Em." She climbed into bed without protest. He tucked the blanket around her the way he always did, snug but not tight. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered it. "Dad, yeah? Did we do something wrong?" The words landed like a punch. Caleb froze. He had prepared himself for financial stress, for awkward conversations, for job interviews. He had not prepared himself for that question. He sat down on the edge of her bed. "No," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "We didn't do anything wrong." Emma's fingers twisted into the blanket. "Then why does it feel like we're in trouble?" Caleb swallowed hard. "Because sometimes the world punishes people who don't fit the picture. Because power protects itself. Because dignity doesn't trend online." But she didn't need that truth yet. So he brushed her hair back gently. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "grown-ups forget how to be fair. That's not our fault." Emma nodded slightly. "Are you sad?" she asked. He forced a small smile. "A little." She reached out and wrapped her arms around him. "You're still the best dad," she whispered. That broke him. He held her tightly, eyes closed, promising himself he would never let her see how close he felt to falling apart. Across town, on the hill overlooking the valley, Eliza Whitmore sat alone in her glass house. The lights were on. The silence was louder than ever. Her phone buzzed constantly on the marble counter. News notifications, investor messages, board emails advising strategic distancing. She muted it. The television screen reflected her own image back at her, poised, powerful, alone. Clips replayed of the hallway photograph, commentators speculating, analysts questioning her judgment. She could end it with one statement: clarify boundaries, emphasize professionalism, reinforce hierarchy. The script had already been drafted by legal. All she had to do was approve it. Instead, she found herself thinking about something entirely different. Emma's voice in the lobby, the way the child had explained solar angles like it was the most natural thing in the world. Caleb in the storm, steady at the control panel, choosing responsibility without asking for recognition. And then his words in the service corridor. "If you erase me to protect yourself, You erase her. Eliza stood and walked to the massive window overlooking Ridgehaven. From this height, the town looked small, manageable, quiet. But she knew now that the damage was not small. If Caleb resigned, and something in her gut told her he might, it would not just be a staffing change. It would be a loss, not a maintenance, of something she had barely allowed herself to feel. For years, she had protected her reputation like armor. Tonight, she saw the cost of that armor. She had everything, and not one person who would choose her without fear of consequence. For the first time in a long time, Eliza Whitmore felt the weight of being powerful and powerless at the same time. And in a small bedroom across town, an 8-year-old girl lay awake wondering if her father's dignity had a price. The Whitmore Foundation Gala returned exactly 1 week later. Same ballroom, same crystal chandeliers, same polished marble floors reflecting tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns. 500 of Ridgehaven's wealthiest donors and out-of-state investors filled the room again, as if nothing had happened. But everything had. The rumors hadn't fully died. The headlines had cooled, but the story still lingered in conversations and private texts. Board members stood in tight circles near the stage, speaking in low, strategic tones. Caleb almost didn't come. He had already submitted his resignation. It would be processed by Monday. Attending felt unnecessary. But Emma insisted. "It's for the scholarship fund," she had said, holding the old STEM brochure like proof. "You said we don't hide when we didn't do anything wrong." So he borrowed the same suit again, pressed it carefully, drove them both downtown. Now he stood near the back of the ballroom, close to the service doors, not by accident. It was where he felt most comfortable, not hidden, just not central. Emma stood beside him in a navy dress with tiny silver stars stitched across the fabric. She looked up at the chandeliers like she was mapping constellations. On stage, the MC introduced Eliza Whitmore. Polite applause filled the room. She walked out slowly, poised as ever. Silver gown, dark hair pulled back, expression controlled. A teleprompter glowed faintly at the edge of the stage, the carefully written speech approved by legal, reviewed by the board, designed to reassure investors in quiet speculation. Eliza stood at the podium. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at the room, and then she did something no one expected. She stepped slightly away from the teleprompter. The room stilled. "For years," she began, her voice clear but softer than usual, "I have measured my life by achievement." A few polite nods from the crowd. "I believed that if I built something large enough, strong enough, no one would see the parts of me that felt small." The board members near the front exchanged quick glances. "I built Whitmore Systems with discipline," she continued, "with precision, with control." She paused. "And in that process, I built walls." The ballroom had grown unnaturally quiet now. "I have gone home every night to a house that echoes," she said. "I convinced myself that was strength." She let the words settle. "But recently, something happened." She didn't reference headlines. She didn't say, "scandal." A photograph circulated. Speculation followed. "And instead of protecting people, I protected optics." The air shifted. Eliza's eyes scanned the room, steady. A good man was questioned. A little girl was embarrassed. Not because of truth, but because of assumption. No one moved. "Caleb Hart has done nothing wrong," she said clearly. "He has never sought advantage. He has never crossed a boundary. He has done his job with integrity, often in ways you will never see." Several executives shifted in their seats. "And when my building nearly lost power during a winter storm, it was Caleb who kept this campus running." Quietly, without credit. Now people were listening differently. "I allowed silence to suggest guilt," she continued. "That was my failure." Her voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. This company was built on innovation. It should also be built on fairness. The board chair's jaw tightened. Then Eliza lifted her chin slightly. "And so tonight, I am correcting something publicly." Her gaze moved to the back of the room. "Found him." Caleb felt the shift before he even understood it. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Attention rolled through the ballroom like a wave. Eliza didn't look past him. She looked at him. "Caleb Hart," she said clearly, her voice carrying across crystal and marble. Emma's fingers tightened around his hand. "Would you consider going on one date with me? No dramatic flourish, no smile for cameras. Just a question. Honest." The silence was absolute. 500 people watched a maintenance supervisor in a borrowed suit become the center of gravity. Caleb's heart pounded, but his face remained calm. This wasn't about pride. This wasn't about status. He looked down at Emma. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something closer to wonder. She nodded. Just once. That nod wasn't about romance. It was about safety, about whether this woman on stage would choose them publicly, not hide them. Caleb lifted his eyes back to Eliza. He saw no performance there. No strategy, just vulnerability. "Yes," he said, simple. Steady. "Yes, I would." For a second, nothing happened. Then someone in the middle of the room began to clap, not loud. Tentative. Another joined. Then another. The sound built slowly, not explosive, not theatrical, but undeniable. Applause filled the ballroom. Some investors clapped because it was easier than resisting. Some clapped because they admired courage. Some clapped because they realized they were witnessing something rare, power choosing integrity instead of control. The board could not interrupt without appearing cruel. The narrative had shifted. It was no longer scandal. It was clarity. Eliza exhaled, a breath she had been holding for days. Caleb didn't step forward. He didn't bow. He didn't chase the spotlight. He simply stood beside his daughter. And in that moment, the imbalance that had defined the story dissolved. Not because their titles changed, but because truth had been spoken where lies had spread. Emma leaned closer to her father. "Dad," she whispered softly, smiling. "Yeah? You're not in trouble anymore." Caleb swallowed, eyes never leaving the stage. "No," he said quietly. For the first time all week, he believed it. The morning after the gala did not explode. There were no dramatic headlines, no hostile takeovers, no walkouts. There were emails. Some sharp, some cautious, some surprisingly supportive. But the world did not end. Whitmore systems opened on time. Employees swiped their badges. Coffee brewed in the break room. Snow melted slowly along the sidewalks outside. Inside the executive office, Eliza met with the board. The tone was controlled but tense. "You took a reputational risk," one member said carefully. "I corrected a narrative," Eliza replied. "Public vulnerability is not a strategy," another added. "It is when silence harms people," she said evenly. There were no raised voices, no threats. But the power dynamic had shifted in a subtle way. Eliza had not chosen recklessness. She had chosen alignment. And investors, despite their discomfort, respected stability more than spectacle. The markets had not panicked. The campus had not imploded. By the end of the week, the conversation changed from gossip to policy. Eliza announced a new initiative through the Whitmore Foundation, a scholarship program for employees' children pursuing science and technology education. Applications would be reviewed by an independent committee, merit-based, transparent, not charity. Opportunity. It wasn't framed around Emma. It wasn't presented as a romantic gesture. It was framed as investment in families who kept the company functioning. The announcement shifted something in Ridgehaven. People who had mocked began reconsidering. Local news outlets ran a different headline this time. Whitmore Foundation launches employee STM initiative. Caleb returned to work on Monday as scheduled. No escort out. No termination meeting. His resignation letter had been acknowledged, but not processed. HR called him in briefly. "We'd like to retain you," they said carefully. "Understood," Caleb replied. He didn't ask for promotion. He didn't ask for leverage. He asked one thing. "My daughter's name stays out of internal conversations." They agreed. When he walked back into the service corridor, something had changed. The sideways looks were gone. Technicians greeted him normally. A few even clapped him on the shoulder quietly. Respect, not spectacle. He tightened bolts, checked panels, logged maintenance reports. The same job. But the air felt lighter. At school, Emma noticed the shift too. The whisper stopped. One teacher congratulated her on the solar purifier design. Another mentioned the scholarship initiative. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. Emma had been accepted into the Ridgehaven STEM enrichment program. Not because of Eliza, because of her test scores, her science fair submission, and the interview she completed on her own. Caleb held the acceptance letter in both hands, like it might dissolve. Emma jumped up and down in the kitchen, nearly knocking over a glass. "You did this," he told her. "No," she corrected proudly. "We did." Dating did not begin with cameras. It began with coffee. One quiet Saturday morning at a small cafe near the edge of town. No security team. No press. Just Caleb in jeans and Eliza in a simple sweater. They talked, not about headlines, not about the gala, about Ridgehaven, about Claire, about Eliza's parents, about what it meant to build something and still feel empty. There were boundaries. Eliza did not visit campus maintenance unannounced. Caleb did not appear at executive events without invitation. They agreed on something simple. Emma's stability came first. If anything threatened that, they would reassess. Emma met Eliza again in controlled, slow moments. Library visits. Science museum trips in the next town over. No sudden integration. No forced affection. Emma asked questions directly, as children do. "Are you going to fire my dad?" she asked once. Eliza blinked, then smiled softly. "No. Are you going to move him into a glass castle?" Eliza glanced at Caleb. "Only if he wants one." Caleb laughed quietly. "I like our kitchen." They kept it steady. No fairy tale shortcuts. No dramatic life upgrades. Caleb still drove his aging truck. Eliza still lived in her glass house, though she began leaving the lights off in rooms she didn't use, as if reclaiming space. The community adjusted. Ridgehaven moved on, as small towns do. The narrative that began with mockery ended with something quieter, admiration. Not because a billionaire chose a maintenance supervisor, but because a powerful woman admitted fault. Because a father refused to sacrifice his daughter's dignity. Because a child continued building solar purifiers as if none of the noise mattered. Stability returned, not polished, not perfect, but earned. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was building again. Snow fell gently over Ridgehaven, softening rooftops and muting the world into something peaceful. Inside Caleb's small kitchen, the air smelled like cocoa and cinnamon. The window above the sink fogged slightly from the warmth inside, blurring the quiet street beyond. Emma sat at the kitchen table, completely absorbed in a new science kit spread out in careful sections. Wires, small panels, a tiny instruction booklet she was determined not to need. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she connected two pieces together. Caleb stood at the stove, stirring hot chocolate in a dented saucepan he'd owned for years. He tasted it, added a little more cocoa, then poured 3 mugs. At the table, Eliza sat beside Emma, not in a tailored suit, not beneath chandeliers, not framed by cameras. Just present. Her sleeves were rolled slightly. Her hair was loose. She was reading the instructions upside down while Emma explained them confidently. It converts stored light into movement, Emma said seriously. It's basically a baby version of what your company does. Eliza smiled. Then I have a very impressive consultant. Caleb set the mugs down carefully. For a moment, they were just three people sharing a kitchen. Emma looked up, eyes moving between them. So, she began, tapping her fingers against the table. Is this our thing now? The question hung in the warm air. Caleb met Eliza's eyes. Not as an employee, not as a headline, as a father. Eliza's answer was gentle. Only if we all agree. Emma considered that carefully. Then she nodded once. Okay. Laughter filled the room, quiet, unforced, real. Caleb felt something settle inside him. Being chosen publicly had mattered, but being chosen here, in a small kitchen, with snow falling and cocoa steaming, mattered more. Eliza looked around the room and understood something she had never found in boardrooms or glass houses. Belonging didn't echo. It breathed, and Emma, finally free of whispers and fear, leaned back in her chair and smiled. Safe. If this story touched you, subscribe to Just Dad Things for more single dad stories and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.